Call to order the school committee meeting of November 4th, 2024, 7 p.m. This meeting is taking place in person, 29 Highland Avenue, room 227. You can also join via Zoom using the link posted in the meeting agenda. Our first item of business is approval of the agenda.
Second.
Under discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? The matter carries. Public comment. The Salem School Committee would like to hear from the public on issues that affect the school district and are within the scope of the committee's responsibilities. Spanish interpretation is available for anyone who needs it. The members of the school committee would like to remind the public that Salem Public School students regularly attend school committee meetings. We encourage all meeting participants to model respectful and productive public discourse for our young learners. Do you have any comment online? Comment in the room? Seeing none. Approval of the consent agenda. These are the minutes of the school committee meeting of October 21st and the warrants of October 24th and October 31st.
I'll second.
Under discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Matter carries. We'll take out of order the student representative report. Mark?
So the student equity group, we have met today at the conference room at the school, and we mainly went over three things. One student raised concerns about the safety of the hold-in place and how sometimes we don't know what exactly may be going on in a hold-in place, and it can cause some worrying of the safety of the students, and that became a conversation. And the next order that we had discussed was SAT prep, and how there seems to be a lack of SAT prep for these students, both for the senior class and the junior class that just recently took the PSAT. And we are discussing ways that we could involve SAT prep. And there was a third one.
It was, the phones.
Phones at lunch. And so one of the sophomore class officers raised the question of why phones are not allowed at lunch, and would like to have conversations with the school principal and faculty about the approval of phones at lunch.
Any questions from committee members? Great, thanks. All right, next item is superintendent's report.
Good evening, everybody. We have a few topics on here tonight, mostly led by Laura Assad, who's going to give some updates from her department. I do just want to take a moment to talk about smoke. We've been getting a lot of questions about smoke in the area, and over the last week, I appreciate the flexibility and patience of both our students, our families, and staff. It is something that was never in the playbook in superintendent preparation courses that would be dealing with smoke delays or smoke dismissals. I do want to say that today there were a lot of questions about whether there was too much smoke in the buildings. We did consult very closely with the Department of Public Health and the health agent in the city. He was very appreciative. He came to the schools, walked Salem High School and Horace Mann with me today, and he did not deem that there was a need to adjust the school day. We did keep people indoors today and kept all activities during the school day indoors, and we'll continue to adjust as necessary. But the levels of smoke in the building did not require us to make any adjustments. I do want to point out that last week when we did dismiss the high school early and we moved Horace Mann, the fires were were in the proximity of the school, and the level of intensity of the smoke was a lot higher last week than it was today. It seemed like the winds just happened to be blowing in the right direction. So they, especially earlier today, where they were positioned towards Salem, and we ended up having a pretty smoky beginning of the school day. But we worked very closely to close the exterior vents enhance our exhaust systems, and then also to encourage people to run the HEPA filters, which we still have, and we still, even if they're not in classrooms, we can bring them out and run them as necessary. But this is definitely a new chapter for us, and we'll continue to adjust. And just so people know, I'm not an expert on smoke and the impact, but we do have folks in the city that are that do guide us. I will say we're also paying very close attention to those students and staff that have respiratory conditions, and our nurses have been very well versed in trying to support them and making sure that they get what they need if there's any concerns about individual staff or students that have asthma or other respiratory conditions. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, if I can just add to that, so we, one of the things that we evaluate in terms of the decision today, but also the conditions over the last several school days when there has been smoke, is not just the immediate situation, but also the wind forecast and the ceiling height for the weather. So the fire chief was consulting with the state fire marshal, with the health agent, and with the superintendent around the forecast for which direction the wind was going to be going and sending the smoke. We know where the brush fire is located, so if the wind is looking like it's going to shift in a way that's favorable towards moving the smoke away from where the schools are, we didn't want to preemptively dismiss school when it looked like it was going to clear up relatively quickly.
I think just, based on some parent feedback, I think it would be great if, even though I know this is not something that we've all prepped for, but it doesn't look like it's going to be raining anytime soon. So I think it would be great to make some kind of FAQ or FYI form that just says, for folks who aren't watching this or aren't engaged in social media, and put that into Parent Square that just says, here's what we do. We have the health department come in. We consult with the fire department. Here's how we walk through the buildings. Here's what the HEPA filters are doing. Here's where they are. Here's what you can do if your child suffers from some respiratory condition that you're really concerned about. Just so that we have one central place where all of that stuff exists and parents kind of know what the protocol is, even if the protocol is evolving.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, especially since now we have had multiple days. This wasn't, I was hoping it would just be a one-day smoke out. There's been now multiple days. So, and as you said, it could last depending on, whether there's rain or snow. Dare I say snow. So, yeah, I think that's a good suggestion.
Still your report.
Oh, it's still my report. Okay. So now to the meat of the meeting. Laura Saad is here, our Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Engagement. And we have two different topics, or Laura's going to discuss two different topics with you. And now that she's in her role for a second year, a lot of the work is starting to take hold. And just recently, we launched our first parent survey, which admittedly didn't have the responses that we'd like, but it's a start. It's a baseline. It gave us 300 responses and directionally gives us some things to look at. And Laura will talk about what we learned. And I do think it's important that districts are surveying parents on an annual basis, and so we will continue. And I think Laura will speak to some of the efforts to try to get more families to respond in the future. And the second is we did an equity audit that was really looking at our policies and practices. Also did a interview of our executive team. It wasn't like a full comprehensive look at all aspects of the organization, but it did look at our practices and policies. And Laura's going to speak to some of the findings and recommendations. The full report is still being copy edited, and we'll send that to you. But I think it's most important that Laura have an opportunity to give you her sort of understanding of what we learned from it, and that's more, I think, valuable than just seeing it on a piece of paper. I think you all know that Laura is a trusted member of our leadership team and longtime Salem resident, and we're lucky to have her in SPS. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and I think you're going to start with the family survey.
I am.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Thank you for having me here today to share some updates, and for all of you for trusting me to do this work and to elevate the voices of our students and families, and also the trends and behaviors of our practices that are driven by our policy. I want to start off with saying that, like, while I am serving as the DEI director and engagement, this work is not just my own. Like, it's a responsibility of everyone that's here and all of our educators within our organization. The work is hard, but the responsibility needs to be something that we hold everyone accountable for. My role is also to provide an opportunity to bring impact to the district. So if there are inequities or there are opportunities that our district can continue to move forward with, then, I see that as my role in bringing it to this body, to our executive team, to our building leaders, and bring those things to light so that we can work collectively to improve in the way that we service students, families, educators all around. What I will show you today is just the majority will be data. It will be anecdotes from our surveys, from our family and caregiver responses that we received. I'll talk a little bit about what the process was for both with the equity audit and also for the family survey, and it will show what most may know, and also bring to light some of the work that we need to do and that we need to do a better job at doing. So, I forgot my clicker. Carlos had me prepared and I did not come prepared. Okay.
Can we take questions now, or do you want to save them for the end?
Does anyone have a question now?
Member Manning does.
Hi.
Just a very simple one. Could just define for me, like, who is included when you're talking about caregivers?
Sure. So, and it could be a biological parent, it could be an aunt, a grandparent, a neighbor, someone who has custody of our young person.
Okay.
So anyone who is in sole care of a young
Has
person.
legal care. So,
Correct.
all right. I didn't know if it meant like the daycare teacher or the what. Okay.
No, this is who the student is staying
Okay.
with and is being cared for the majority of the time.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. I want to just highlight some of the focuses of the department. The Department of DEI, as you remember, oversees the departments of, like, Parent Information Center, translation interpretation. When it comes to engagement, it's engagement of our educators and families, et cetera. And those are all covered under priority 2, 3, and 4 under our strategic plan. So just wanted to bring forward what those main focuses are and what drove the work of what you are about to, what I'm about to present for the body. This is also just as a reminder to the school committee. Last time I presented was in March, and 2 of the main focuses of the work that I focused on in my first year in this role were, again, to partner with a consultant to conduct our equity audit and to conduct a family survey. Both of those pieces are also highlighted in our strategic plan, and I wanted to make sure that that work was underway right away so that we can have some data, some input, and some level of a baseline for our building leaders to go by when it came to specifically family and caregiver information that we receive. So for the Spring Family Survey, that falls under our priority 3.4, which states that we want to elevate voices of students, parents, and families to tap into their funds of knowledge and prepare them to take action. So this was our very first formal parent caregiver survey, at least that was done district-wide. I believe that our individual schools have sent out surveys either for ways that families want to be communicated with, or other surveys around different topics and different things. This survey we did work with our Panorama company that we use for our student services as well, and they were able to provide a parent caregiver survey that we utilize and that we to some extent made our own based on what we needed for our families. So I want to talk a little bit about what our approach was and how we got to the final focus areas that we have in the survey. So the first thing we were able to do is I had a conversation, of course, with our executive team, members of our district leadership team, family engagement team, and just some feedback from parents, like random feedback of like, what are the things that if we were to send out a survey, what are the things that you would want us to know as a district? So I got feedback from all of those entities and came up with 4 main ones. The survey did open up from June until the end of August, and it was available in all of the languages that we provide services for. One piece that I did want to mention, and that's why there's an asterisk, and it's the asterisk explanation is on the next slide. Panorama did offer other languages outside of the ones that are listed on the slide deck. And what we did have to do is for these particular languages, we use some of our financial resources to support getting correct translations because it was an automatic translation from the English, and we wanted to make sure that it was culturally appropriate for the families that we wanted to have access to these surveys. So we focus on those Spanish, Brazilian, Portuguese, and Haitian Creole. So the next part of the work that we did was we created a distribution plan. We wanted to make sure that we took advantage of some of the work that we did in the summer through the community walks. We already, usually for anything that we send out, and we meaning our family engagement team, parent information center, and any of the community members that we work with, we sent out parent square groups. We had QR codes that were available during parent meetings, parent-teacher conferences. We sent it out on parent newsletters, social media pages, and mostly the usual things that we do to send out information to families. There were flyers available in the main office and, as I mentioned, during community walks, and we had it available at every table, every community member table during the back to school fair. With all of those efforts, we still were only able to get 317. But those are 317 families that provided us with a baseline. So I'm still grateful for those who took the time to be able to give us this information. And we have at least some idea of how we can move forward because all of the responses are very valuable in the work that we have ahead of us. And as I said, we use some resources for the other languages that we serve to provide adequate language that's available for our families that speak Haitian Creole, Brazilian, Portuguese, and Spanish. I want to go into, and I know that that's a little blurry, and I apologize about that. I took a snapshot directly from Panorama, and to talk a little bit about who took the survey. So on the top left-hand corner, we have particular subgroups, either families who identified by the language that they spoke. So we have 82% of the survey takers spoke English, 12% spoke Spanish, and 3% spoke other or multiple languages. And then there were other subgroups that were protected from so that there wasn't too many identifiers. So if it was that they spoke a specific language other than the ones that were named, Panorama does a subgroup specifically for the few that answered separately from those listed. When it comes to race and ethnicity, those who identify as Black or African American, 7%, Hispanic or Latino, 16%, those who identify as white are 64%, and 2 or more races are about 10%. So those are the when it comes to race of the survey takers of who took the survey. And then the last, which is to the right of our screen, when it comes to subgroup identified under the relationship of the student, 81% of survey takers were mothers, identified as mothers. 12% identified as fathers, and 3% as grandmother, and 2% are guardian or like a step parent, aunt, etc. That was another 2%. Some of the work that I mentioned earlier when we decided to do some of the work and include like our members of our district leadership team, our executive team, we got some feedback that we wanted to figure out what it was that was going to drive some of the school improvement plans, and also what was important data that our principals and other school admin needed. And we came up with these 4. So it was barriers to engagement, school climate, school safety, and school fit. The survey provides several other focus areas as well, but if we were to provide all of them to our families, that would have been a 20-minute plus survey that we didn't want to burden our families to take. So we narrowed it down to these 4, and the survey was no more than 15 minutes per each child. And when we messaged to families, we asked them to think about one student. If they had multiple students in the district, we encouraged them to take 1 survey per each, but if they wanted to, we encouraged them to think of 1 student within their family to take this 1 survey, because that would allow for us to get all the information that we needed, and some of it may have also been applicable for their other students that they had with us. So barriers to engagement, these are the pieces that survey takers responded, like how big of a problem are these issues when it comes to the levels of engagement that we offer and all of those opportunities. When it comes to school climate, it talks about the perception of the learning and what's the climate in the school, like how does the student feel when it comes to either feeling welcomed or feeling seen, whether it's just in school or reflected in the curriculum. Perceptions of the student when we talk about school safety, like what's the physical safety. So I appreciate Mark mentioning earlier that in the student equity group that there was a conversation that was already started amongst high school students, and reflecting on that topic, because that was one of our focus areas. We get to see the parents' perspective when it comes to that. And then also school fit, and see whether or not the school that the student is attending, the school is the right fit for them, and how parents feel when it comes to that. So this is also a screenshot from the survey itself. And what you see is favorability by topic. So what Panorama does is it breaks up the questions to say that it's not at all a problem when it comes to the questions under either barriers to engagement, school fit, and the other topics. And this is how you get your percentage based on those favorability data. It doesn't give you the opposite of what's not so favorable, but I've been able to review the entire survey results and have some areas of opportunity that I want to highlight. But I just want to say that I'm generally pleased, at least with when it comes to how families feel when it comes to school safety and the barriers to engagement, that for the most part, those who responded to the survey feel that they have little to no issues when it comes to school safety and barriers to engagement. Again, I want to also reflect again that the survey takers may not have reflected our demographic of students that we serve and the demographic of families that represent those students as well. So I want to move to talk about some of the takeaways. So after reading the surveys, I wanted to think about, like what came to mind for me, for the team, as the results came in. And as I said, for me, it's clear that parents overall are looking at ways to be more involved when it comes to what's happening in the classroom. It was made clear, part of the survey included open-ended questions, and that came up even in the free responses. This was also aside from the multiple choice questions that Panorama had already offered. In your packets, you may not have the open response questions, but I did take some of that information and will be presenting it to you shortly. The other pieces that I found was that a lot of families, when we were offering the survey, number one, there were a lot of families in transition between the time that we offered it to the time that we closed it. It was the start of summer. So people are not thinking about taking a survey. People are thinking about the end of school. People are thinking about vacationing, hopefully, and just kind of wrapping up and not thinking about school. So to get a message about a 15-minute survey was probably not the ideal thing to do at that time. Which leads to the next point, that was probably too late to send something out in June. We also find, another takeaway is that we have been able to find unique ways in the ways that we survey families, and we just have to come up with other ways, because surveying it should not be like the one way for us to collect this information. And we do realize that. We know that before we conducted the survey, and we will continue to build on those efforts on just how to collect this valuable information aside from sending out an electronic survey that someone may not be able to know how to take. Building leaders now have a baseline for their school improvement plans, and there were just some questions that some of our members in the executive team and in our district leadership wondering about the responses on discipline, right? And how parents are thinking about that. And the survey doesn't necessarily elaborate on some of those pieces. And then, of course, that there's more work that needs to be done on academic preparation and relevance. We know that there are families that are coming in at different times of the year, and what one student may get at the beginning of the school year versus in March when someone is coming in is not the same. And depending on where the educator is in terms of their teaching style and how to support a student in transitioning, like what supports is that educator getting, and how are we ensuring that our students are getting what they need regardless of when they're coming in. Maybe next time. Let's see. All right. So some of the strengths that came up for us under the survey, this is something that what I found that our school administration was eager for. There are other data points that they are collecting, whether it's through student data from their own Panorama survey that they take, and then there are other benchmarks that they're meeting through other entities, and this is something that was missing. This was a missing piece for a lot of our buildings, or for all of our buildings rather. And our team is really motivated. Our educators and principals are really motivated to be able to move forward with a lot of this work that the families are suggesting. Schools seem to be generating a sense of belonging and cultural connection. So whether it's through a celebration or some type of recognition, or allowing a student to talk about how they see themselves in the work that they're doing, and to really show and showcase the work that they do and in their own way, is something that I know that we've worked really hard on. And then something that jumped out for me throughout the survey was 93% report that they have little to no negative memories at their school. So that was a great data point to show, and it's a strength that we have, because that just shows that at least from the survey takers, their parents feel like they have a really good experience overall for their students in school. And 82% feel a sense of belonging in our schools as well. I want to dive into the areas of improvement. I mentioned this already, that this survey does not, or at least the responses does not reflect the demographic of our student population. or the families that we serve. If we go back again to the beginning, we have a lot of English-speaking mothers that took the survey. Like, the data speaks for itself. And it also goes to speak to the way that we want to be able to do some extra work to get the responses that we need, so that it is as even level playing field as possible, so that we can get information of what we may not know. The lived experience of someone who is not a mother who speaks English might be very different from what was reported, and these numbers can look very, very different. Just based on simple conversation with families from all walks of life. I believe that we need to grow in our efforts when it comes to school climate and school fit. There was some data points that jumped out for me where 42% of our families report that they worry about violence in our schools. So while overall that the school climate and school safety was one of the top areas where there was high favorability, there's still this 42% where families don't feel that families feel that some sense of lack of safety in our schools. Where 31% worry that their child will have a hard time getting help from an adult regarding bullying. Where 41% of families report that their teacher does not match their student learning style. Where 48% of families report that their child is not comfortable in asking for help. So what jumps out for me with that one specifically, when we think about our student panorama data, we find that our students report that they have a trusted adult, but their families don't know that. Right? So that for me felt really contradicting in the sense of like, what is the missing piece that we're not communicating with our families? Because our students feel it. Our students can identify, for the most part, a trusted adult in their building, and that's a high number. I know of that. But when it comes to like the work that is done with our families, that there seems to be a disconnect, because that's too much of a high number for me. 50% report that classroom lessons are not as motivating to their child. And then 56% report that their student schedule is too busy and prevents them from being engaged as we would like them to be. So there's some pressure that comes with the ways that we want to share how engaged they can be, whether that's through PTO or through parent-teacher conferences or any other forms of engagement or events and opportunities that we offer. We have 56% of our families that are saying like they can't come, they're too busy, right? Most of us here are parents, and we can attest to that as well, right? And we understand that. I also want to think about when it comes to this, like what are some of the assumptions that our district is making of these 56% of our parents that can't come, and you think about the biases that come with that. And then you think about the breakdown of the race within our families that we serve. And does it look, do we make assumptions, the same assumptions for the 56% of the families that took the survey, the same of the ones that did not? And what does that look like when it comes to English-speaking mothers who are literally telling us that they can't come because they're busy, and a non-English-speaking parent that might not have the same opportunity? And we all hear it. They don't care. We need to see more. And I can share with the committee the full report where there were some comments that were made on there that it was suggested that we need to do a better job in getting the Latino families involved, right? So these are the types of things that I want to make sure that like we do highlight and we do value this information, and we also have to think about of those who did not take the survey and what's happening with the families that, when it comes to engagement, how are we treating and how are we moving forward with supporting when they too are telling us that they're busy? Is it the same response? So that's an area of improvement that I want to highlight for that. When it comes to the trends and open-ended questions, rather than sharing all of the language all in one screen, because there was a lot of really great responses, the open-ended questions, there were about 4, so I only took the maybe two questions that were specific to areas where we can grow as an organization. And the other two were more centered on demographics. So whether it was what race or ethnicity do they identify with, et cetera. And I didn't want to take up time in speaking on that. So one of the questions were, if you were in charge of the school, how would you try to engage more parents within the community? And this is just a word cloud that came up for all of those responses, right? So for our survey takers, we thought about, how do we engage with caregivers? How do we do in the way that we work with school events? We do a really great job in sharing information. There's a lot of conversation about salts because that seems to be, and remember, again, this was between June and August, so this is not anything that's recent, at least within the recent talks. And the information on like the ideas that parents are bringing into the schools on the ways that they can engage. So there's always an opportunity for parents to be able to give feedback, and that showed in the responses. So that's just the word cloud of some of of all of the responses that came forward under that question. The next one is, what can the school do to help your child engage in learning activities? Parents want homework, right? ST Math seems to be a topic that parents want to see more of. They want to be able to see projects, schoolwork, more explanation. Again, going back to that, one of the takeaways is that parents want to be able to be connected directly to what's happening in the classroom. And that showed, again, under this question. People want to know what's happening with math, what are the topics that are being discussed. We can't rely on the kids to be able to fully give a briefing of their everyday, because that's not going to happen. So parents want to know more. And the last question was any way or final ideas on how to improve the school district. Please let us know. And these were some of the comments that were made when it comes to this section. They thought about transportation monitors. Well, at least with it, when it comes to transportation and monitors, just kind of paying attention to what's happening on the students' way to and from school. And when it comes to school safety, I mean, Panorama did talk about school specifically, so you think about the physical building and what's happening within, but when it comes to their arrival and dismissal of school, that's a topic that was not covered, so that I wanted to bring that and highlight that. Consistent days of dismissal and after-school programs to be 5 days a week. So thinking about what's being offered right now, where for some students it's not an everyday, and parents are looking for something that's more consistent and information around after-school programs. And then reassess standards-based grading. This is a direct comment from the survey. In theory, it's a great idea, but not all teachers use the whole point range, and in the end, certain classes are giving kids higher GPAs. So that's a wonder, something that we need to do some more digging into. And last comment is administrators don't often respond to emails. They don't expect everyone to drop what they're doing, but to get back to them right away. So it's that communication between administrators and families where there's either limited response or not so much. Again, I want to highlight that this was done in June, and we were closing schools, and we were also thinking about summer and transitioning into this new school year. So I want to make sure that that doesn't become the understanding that that's how our administrators work all year, and I want to recognize that. Lastly, with regards to the survey, some of the next steps that I'm looking to do and follow up with is make sure that the survey is available in April. We'll start a lot earlier this year. Now that we have our questions, they wouldn't change. We'll keep it the same. We'll just make it available much earlier and kind of get an opportunity to get families while they're still in the in thinking about and being present while kids are in school. I will work with Salem Public Schools educators to get more responses, and whether that means just finding other unique ways to make it so that we get them, because I do want to double our responses for the end of this year. And then collaborate with building leaders to ensure that they get the feedback that they need, and ensure that school improvement plans are implementing some of these feedback that we're getting from families. That's the end of that part, and I want to open it up to any questions from the group.
Member Cruz?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Laura, for the presentation and for recapping the data. Certainly a lot, I think, in here to dig in on. A couple things. So when you had mentioned that some of these survey questions wouldn't change, I know you had talked about the stakeholder group. I'm just selfishly thinking about the work that this committee has in front of us, and some of I think the response rate is actually a representative sample. I know that you didn't, in terms of just the end count, right? But in terms of the demographic piece, totally with you there.
Yeah.
So I think I'd like to know a little bit more about like why the increase by another 300? Is that to get to the demographic goal that you're seeking? Just because I just want to understand that. And then the other piece would be around a question that I think should change, which is but I just don't know if the panorama survey function allows for it. It's the question about race or ethnicity. Race and ethnicity are both put together versus separated. And I think that's a missed opportunity for us to understand the multiple identities that folks hold. I know there's the same race or like multiple race kind of question there, but I'm just thinking about like our Afro-Latino populations and all the other, mezclas that are out there. So I would just ask if it was possible to bifurcate the two. That'd be great, because I also think that there's some opportunities as we think about family engagement. If we understand where our families are coming from, their points of origin, their family origins, that also is an opportunity for us to think about ways we can be engaging them culturally. And then creating that kind of bridge across cultures. So those are two things that came to mind there. And then the only other thing that I think I had circled and had a question on was, it was around the takeaway around the safety piece. I guess when I see those numbers around concerns around the bullying, the safety, the violence, I know we've done a lot of work around like the intervention across tiers, the data systems that we're putting in place, and you talked about that misalignment. So I guess what I would just want to hear is kind of like the follow-up from Steve, really, about kind of what the progress has been with respect to all those efforts that we've had to date. I know we've had like multiple iterations of it, but I'd just love to hear from like the school safety kind of folks about what progress has been made. Where do we see like the opportunities identified here? Like what's our solve for that? Especially when I see things like that first comment around transportation. Like that's always the place where I have the most concern. We know things happen on the bus, but I just want to like better understand the strategies that are currently at play, where we see room for improvement, et cetera.
When we debriefed this survey as an executive team, we were actually surprised that the safety data wasn't worse. And by that I mean, people are very concerned about school violence in general, and
Of course, stakeholders too.
yeah, stakeholders are. I mean, as a parents, I think every parent is concerned about that in the world we live in, and certainly after incidents happen. But there is great concern about violence in schools. I think staff feel it, and I think our parents do as well. I hear the most concern and anxiety from parents around issues of violence. Lockdown situations. There is definitely concerns around bullying, and but not to the degree. I think the anxiety is more about, are my kids safe from threats, within the school or outside the school. And I do think, the kids brought it up to, Mark was there today. The students brought it up. One of the students said today, every time they hear the loudspeaker go off and there's a hold in place, even though that's generally a medical emergency, there's panic that ensues for people. And so I do think there's tremendous stress and anxiety that comes from families around school violence, about the concerns about their kids being safe in school. I mean, I see Lisa Gold in the audience. This is her almost full-time job, is the work around crisis, along with the high school building project. But I think we've done a lot of good work in the last few years, and we should do an update to the committee eventually about that. But I read it more about that, and I actually thought it was lower than I expected. I thought there'd be more concerns, because that's what I hear from families the most. And I know as a parent myself, that's the thing you worry about when you send your kids to school is, God forbid something happens.
Thank you.
I did want to respond to the two questions that you had for me in terms of the increase in number. So it's a yes and. So for me, I felt that with the efforts that we did, that we think we could have received a higher participation rate. And I was hoping that, like, at minimum, we would get around 500. There were various ways that we connected with families, and we had a lot of face-to-face, and we were out in the public a lot. And we just expected the response rate to be a little higher than that. In terms of the demographic and trying to get a more diverse pool of respondents, yes, of course, we would want to be able to get as many as possible, hence why we went to things like the ice cream bowl, we went to the different block parties, we went to the farmers market, we went to do some door knocking, we sent it out to the housing authority, we went to different neighborhoods, and we tabled at community events where families were. And those were not still opportunities. Again, we were very intentional. While we were intentional in the work, this was our first survey. And this is not something that our families were thinking of, like, oh, yeah, I want to think about that. It's the first time that they had ever heard of such a thing. So I want to give us some grace when it comes to that this was a first introduction. And I can understand that people were reluctant to participate.
Makes sense.
So I think in the second year, that's why I think that continuing with these efforts and adding some other unique, that we will be able to reach those targets. In terms of the question on race and ethnicity, I am going to ask for my friend Ellen, who is what I call a panorama expert. There are some questions that can be changed. And I'm not 100% sure if that question can be. There is an opportunity for us to be able to include additional questions onto the survey. And the more questions that we add, the more time it adds to how much the parent has to take on the survey. So we have to be careful on how many more questions do we want to add and what are we removing, while also understanding that separating this is very important and that race and ethnicity are not one and the same. So I wonder if Ellen can help to answer the question on whether that particular question can be separated or not.
Thank you.
Hi. I think you were asking about the demographic information, right?
That's
yeah.
correct.
So I think those we can customize more specifically. We can certainly work with our representative from Panorama to take a look at that and make sure they understand why we're trying to disaggregate that. The questions, the content questions can, again, be customized, but you want to make sure that we're asking the same question over time so that we can monitor that. So the demographic, I think we can adjust. And we can look into that together. It may not match up with how we are reporting to the state and the federal, because we don't have a lot of control over that. But that doesn't usually match up, because it's an anonymous survey, it doesn't usually match up with our family survey. It's more likely to, we're less likely to be able to break apart race and ethnicity for student surveys, because we connect that to their Aspen profile. Does that make sense?
That does.
Okay.
That does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ellen. Any other questions about the family survey?
Dr. Stark?
Hey, just one other thing I want to add is one thing I hear from families that I think is really important. It's reflected in the survey in different questions. Is parents want a relationship with their child's teacher. and that's something we have to continue to work on. They don't want a relationship with the family engagement facilitator. They don't want a relationship with the nurse or the principal. They want to have a relationship with the people that teach their child and know their child best. And so I think we still have a lot of work to do for figuring out how to create those opportunities. We know conferences aren't really working for parents. I get that feedback a lot, and we're in the midst of trying to rethink that for next year. But what I hear, especially from a lot of the families who, a lot of our non-English speaking families, is they want to know, they want a relationship, they want to know more about their child's teacher and what their child's teacher thinks about their child's progress or lack of progress. And so I think we have more work to do in that area to making those relationships more accessible. I don't think it's that teachers are always unwilling to have that. It's how do you find the time, the space, how does that happen in schools? And so that's just something we, I continue to see in this data, and I hear that from families a lot, and that's something, we know we need to work on, that especially for a non-English speaking family. They shouldn't be always connecting with the family engagement facilitator. They want to hear what the teacher has to say about their child. So I'll just leave it at that, and turn it back over to you, Laura.
Thank you. Any last thoughts, questions before I move forward to the equity audit? Okay, thank you. So can we have the presentation back up? Thank you. Okay, so I want to first introduce, we have our partner in this work through the equity process, Cindy Weeks Bradley, who is joining us online. I want to just share how grateful I am to have been partnering with the equity process and conducting this audit specifically on policy. And if Cindy is on, I'd like for Cindy to introduce herself and speak a little bit about her organization.
I am on, Laura. Thank you very much for the introduction and the opportunity. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me. Over the summer, myself and within my organization, we spent some time with Salem Public Schools, as well as during the fall so far. And we were just looking through your policies, a lot of your practices, procedures, the way that the administrators at the executive level are thinking about things, and trying to see how the panorama data fits into the future of Salem Public Schools along with your policies. So where's the alignment with that? My organization is a very small boutique organization. We focus on self-care, self-wellness, and equity, really aligning those two together, ensuring that there's compassion within the work that we do, and we're exploring all avenues for all people and not just some people, while centering the most marginalized populations. And in Salem Public Schools, while what we noticed in looking at your panorama data, that there were some populations that needed just a little bit more than others. And that's where the equity really comes forward. And I love the question about bifurcating the race and ethnicity, because I am from Barbados. So when I think about me as a Black woman, I am a Black woman, but I am not an American. So I'm not African American, though I have to identify as African American often. And I would just like sometimes to identify as a Black Caribbean woman. So with that being said, thank you once again for being here. If there are any questions that you may have at the end after Laura presents that I can support you with, I am here to do so as well. And Laura, thank you for all that you've done in supporting us and getting us the information. It's been a pure joy to work with you and the superintendent throughout this entire process.
Right. Thank you, Cindy. I want to talk a little bit about what we did in terms of our process before we went into digging into the equity work that needed to be highlighted. What you see on the screen is a list of some of the items that were presented to the organization. So after we partnered with them, these were all of the documents that were provided, and there were things from school committee policies, our strategic plan, the total number of staff that we had, with professional and non-professional status, the number of educators that identified as educators of color, our HR, student handbooks, instructional materials for ELA, math, and science, any PD plans from 2022-23, and other documents that over time became important for us to be able to show because it all ties in together. Something that is not included on here, we did present the information on our enrollment policy, our school choice, information around how we conduct our enrollment and what is on the policy versus the work that is actually being done, not just with enrollment, but with other policies that we have in place. The entire process took approximately 3 months, although Cindy and I have been partnering in this work since we connected back in February, and we've kind of started the conversation and really started the work after July. What I'm going to go over with you today is something that you'll find once the full audit is finalized and provided to you, is the SWOT analysis. So we'll talk about some of the strengths, the weaknesses, and areas of growth, and some takeaways that came forward, and recommendations that folks at the equity process had for us. But the SWOT analysis, it's going to provide insight on all of those pieces, but it allows for us to think about how we are going to move forward with the work based on some of these recommendations. Something that I just want to highlight also, part of the reason why we decided to just focus on policy and to do it in this form is because we have a lot of data already on some of the work that we need to do when it comes to retention and recruitment, and we did a lot of work with TNTP, or the New Teacher Project it was called before. I believe they have a different name now. We have worked with other auditors, and there's enough data and recommendations on those fronts, and our policy needed some areas where we could have someone review, and we needed some support in that. So that's one of the main reasons as to why you're not going to see so much on other aspects of it, just on the policy pieces. I apologize for there being a lot of language on here, and I hope that you all have it printed. So when it comes to the strengths, just want to highlight that what came up in the report was we need to be able to think about that we do have a strong student support system. We do have some great tracking methods and systems on tracking outcomes. Our access to technology, we've done a really great job in ensuring that all students, whether they are only utilizing it here or if they are utilizing devices and things at home, that we're not creating constraints for any of those parts for any of our young people. Our strategic plan, it's our anchor. It's what we use to guide the work that we are providing for our students and families. And there's a lot of good intention and empathy that it has come out of the work that we've already been doing prior to this equity audit on policy was done. When it comes to some of our weaknesses or areas that we need some growth on, of course, we are still needing to do some work on diversifying our staff, unequal resource distribution, like with the inconsistency in allocations, whether it's personnel, financial, without a transparent decision-making process. Tier 1 academic instruction came up in the conversation. Thinking about the language barriers and how our educators are utilizing the tools that we are providing to them when it comes to some of the policies that we have in place and some of the guidance that we provide. and there's a limited understanding of what equity is. I'll speak a little bit about that in a moment. And then dually identified students. How are we supporting our students that are both multilingual, special education, homeless, etc.? And what does the support look like? Is it separate supports for each of the identifiers, or does it look different? And how are we supporting our students that have those multiple identifiers? When it comes to the going back to the limited understanding of equity, this is something that, in my first year, I found to be not surprising. And I say that because I think that there hasn't been enough conversation around how we as a collective identify the term equity. You can go into any of the schools and they may define it one way, and we have to do, and we recognize, Steve and I have had conversations about this, we recognize that we have to do a better job in creating that foundation for our buildings so that they can have a baseline on what to go off of, and then also creating an opportunity to tailor what that looks like based on what the student needs and what the buildings need. On the next slide, when it comes to opportunities, thinking about increased transparency when it comes to funding and resources, and what does that conversation look like? And some of the conversations that Cindy and I had consisted of, like, what does that look like when we're trying to share with either the public or our families on how the funding is being distributed, when there are cuts, when there are, departments or particular areas where we're utilizing those funds, and how we are expanding that. What's the communication around that? Accelerated math review. I know that there's a lot of conversation that comes out of that for us. But what is the comprehensive review action plan, and what are the pathways to ensure equitable access for all of our students when it comes to that? Targeted supports. I'll skip that just because that kind of speaks for itself. Thinking about our Talent Finder Fellows, we know that we had worked with a few educators to support the work of identifying high quality teachers, and thinking about how we can expand some of that work so that we can continue it and not have it be just something that was done through a grant, and that it's a part of our day-to-day to ensure that we are getting, continue to get high quality teachers, and also teachers and other educators that are reflective of our student population. Translation and interpretation services, really supporting our educators, and also some of the work that we're trying to do with our families is helping them understand, when it comes to our educators, what are the tools, how do you use them, when do you use them, and how often, and what's available to them. On the other side is what's the work that we're doing when it comes to our families and our students, of what are their rights, what do they have when they walk into our buildings, and what is our responsibility in ensuring that they are receiving those services and opportunities. Chromebook access, I spoke a little bit about that. What's the replacement cycle on allowing families to keep the devices? I know that our IT department has had conversations about that. So without knowing that, like, when will we have the opportunity to share those opportunities again with families? I spoke a little bit about enrollment. Sorry, I skipped Parent Square and communications. We all know that improving outreach is important. That showed in the Panorama survey, and why I wanted to talk about that first before going into this this conversation. Parents want communication, and I think we do a really good job in communicating information and different methods. And how are we differentiating? Going back to the translation and interpretation pieces, understanding that things need to be proofread, and that not everything gets translated properly in English. And we've had to do some differentiating, and why we have the WhatsApp groups and other things as a backup to ensure that families are getting the messages that we are that we are sending out. So it's what's the supplement to Parent Square, and how are we utilizing Parent Square in the way that could serve our families in the best way possible. Enrollment in our school and school choice, really revisiting the policies around that and ensuring equitable placements for our students. I know that that's a lovely topic and a hot one that we always like to talk about. So I saw some smiles, so I love that. Happy to have that conversation with you all. But again, when it comes to that, is really thinking about how are we supporting our families, again, to touch on the point I made at the start of the presentation, regardless of when families come in, what are the choices that we're giving them? Who has a choice? And what are our policies saying that when it comes to that? I can say that even when it comes to our kindergarten and pre-K enrollment, we're thinking about what does it mean for a family to think about having an application open as early as January versus someone who comes in March? Like, what choice do they have? And even for families who have students that are moving in that want to enroll this school year, what choice do they have depending on when they come in, right? Are we over subscribing some schools? Our policy is guiding us to go a certain route. However, when we think about, again, the school choice policy and what choice do our families really have? So evaluation and retention, aligning our educator evaluation with district values and belonging and opportunity. I can elaborate on this part just from experience. Again, I'm just entering my second year in this role, and the plethora of information and conversations that I've had with educators through our affinity groups, and just conversations with educators regardless of whether they attend affinity groups or not. Just the conversation about feedback and not knowing whether or not they're going to stay because the feedback may not have aligned with whatever the outcome is at the end of the year, is inconsistent. And that is something that I did have a conversation with Cindy and some of the members of this body. And I know for sure it's a discussion that we've had in our executive team around, how are we being consistent and productive on the evaluations that we do provide, so that our educators can know what areas they do need to improve and which parts they need to be able to get training and support on. If we're not being honest when it comes to that, by the end of the year, we're either non-renewing or non-retaining staff, and that essentially may hurt our young people in the future. Some threats. Of course, there's always resistance to change. Anytime that a guidance, a rule, or a policy comes into play, what's the work that we're doing when it comes to ensuring that it's something that people believe and that it becomes a part of their day-to-day versus well, we're only doing it because X person told me, or this is what our district believes, but it's not something that that they believe in themselves. So how are we including educators in any of those processes that we're putting in place? Of course, implicit bias plays a role in all of the things that we do, whether we are here or where everybody comes with their own level of biases. And as I mentioned earlier, even when it comes to, again, the Panorama Family Survey, what are the assumptions that are being made when families are not taking the survey? What are the assumptions that are being made when families who did report, that 56% saying, I can't come, I'm too busy, right? Just reflecting on that. There are other and many more examples that I can provide to you all, but what are those practices and how can we support members within our district to eliminate some of those assumptions that come from implicit bias? Compliance and time constraints, of course, we're always bound by time. What does it mean? What's a realistic time frame and when we are implementing things? So those can be things that prevent us from getting things done a certain way. And policy, because of the way that they're written, slows us down so much. whether it's the process that it takes to try and change something, or the policy doesn't allow us and we have to take our time to be able to do something. And then there's teacher turnover and lack of support. So we may say, here's a policy and a new thing, and we may get some pushback, whether it's from educators, community members, et cetera, again, which can cause folks to leave, not feel happy, not feel a sense of belonging, and et cetera. I do want to share that I think that when it comes to, the lack of support, there are we have so many brilliant educators that bring forward ideas to whether it's building leaders or district leaders. What's the work that we need to do to ensure that some of that is being taken into account? Most of these individuals are people who are in front of our students a lot, and how is that being well received so that we can ensure that it's something that we are at least considering, right? Whether it's an accommodation, whether it's for the student or for the teacher, supplies that may be needed, a time change for something. Some of these things can really impact the way that we're receiving and supporting students while they're in the classroom. And when the educator is not supported or heard, it can cause a lot of these threats to come to light. So just want to highlight that a little bit. So when it comes to some of the key insights and recommendations, or the next couple, we're hitting our last few now. We want to think about what are the different ways that we can continue to create a sense of belonging. Our students who don't speak English, students who are in sub-separate programs, students who may have any form of disability, they're at higher risk because we make assumptions. Right? The reality of the situation is that we make assumptions about them, their families, and what they are able or may not be able to do. How are we alleviating some of those barriers or eliminating them? Are we open to having those difficult conversations? What are those supports that are available to staff without the fear of either retaliation or fear of not being taken serious, right? How are we open, or how are we equipping our building leaders, our executive team, this body, myself, into supporting educators, community members, into having difficult conversation? When it comes to rigor, what's the shared understanding of it? Are we holding our educators accountable for having high standards? And do we, just like the equity conversation, do we all believe the same definition on what rigor is? Or are we coming with I talk about this a lot in other groups, of the pobrecito mindset, of the poor kid, they just got here, right? Why can't we hold that same student with the high rigor and high standards as any of our other students that are here who have been here? Right? We have some brilliant students that are coming from all walks of life that, Steve always says they can do hard things, right? We believe that, and if we really believe that, why do we still have educators who see them as a deficit, right? Student voice. I love that we have a student representative here. I love that we have student equity groups that are still growing and thriving. I love that we have the Student Voice Project at the end of the year, continuing to grow that, and what are the other opportunities that we have available for our young people to continue to give us feedback on what they're experiencing on a day-to-day, on all grade levels, not just the high school. And then continuous improvement on the equity work, and this is where I hold myself accountable, and for you all to continue to hold me accountable for bringing some of these topics to light so that we can move the work forward. I'll just share the bolded, some of the recommendations that you'll see in the full report that we'll get to you by this week. We want to be able to have a shared understanding of equity. We want to address the resource inequities, recruit and retain diverse staff, improve communication and transparency. We want to continue to elevate and empower student voice. Continue to monitor the evaluation process. We want to be able to get clarification on absenteeism policies, engagement. How do we engage non-custodial staff? So Mary, that question from earlier of like, who are we identifying as a parent or family member or caregiver? We have families, students that are in transition from home to home. Who is that? How are we engaging them? Where can we get that information? Alignment of metrics of equity goals, increased transparency in all resource allocations, create inclusive classroom practices, and reevaluating approach on student discipline. And again, the topic of rigor and what does that mean, and are we holding all of our students to a high standard? I will stop there. That is the end. And open it back up for questions. And Cindy's also available online if we have a specific question for anyone at the equity process.
Any questions from the committee? Member Cornell?
Yeah, I just have a question about the equity audit around policies. So are we going to get that in a document? Like, can we get a preview? I'm curious as to what the kind of general feedback was around our policies.
Oh,
the
sure.
school committee policies.
Sure. So yes, you will get the full report that will include the findings of our policies, whether they are equitable, whether they're not, et cetera, and any of the more details on the recommendations that I shared today. It is a larger document that is being finalized with all of the final edits, and you should have that for sure this week.
Okay. One thing we, as a policy subcommittee, spend a lot of time as we sort of plow through each of the policies in order to kind of reassess them, and we do spend a lot of time thinking about language and inclusive language, and so those changes get made quite a lot. But you said something about policies that make things harder, and we do have that conversation also, but it's really difficult to have those conversations in a vacuum. It's just, it's the three of us, and we have input from Steve. So having those things highlighted, like what are the things that are an impediment to the changes that we need to make as a district? Sometimes I'm not sure that we're not going to be able to identify that on our own every time. So if there's a special focus on that, that would be really helpful.
Thank you.
May I respond?
Yes.
She's like, where's that voice coming from? So what I do want to say is that your policies appear to be pretty equitable from our standpoint. So what you have in writing looks really great. It is how they're being implemented in the alignment is what we found to be a challenge. So it's not so much what you have in writing. What you have in writing is like, oh, they have all the language, right? Every buzzword you'd love to hear. But what does that look like in action? So how do we begin to actualize through an equitable lens, first through an equal lens and then through an equitable lens, what you have in writing? So beginning with the policies, you're like in a great place, to be honest. But how do we then advance, amplify what you have in writing to make it so that every single student, every single staff, every single family understands where you're coming from, why you're doing what you're doing, and feel a sense of belonging? And I just wanted to really say this piece because this is going to show up in the final writing. There are 4 stages to psychological safety that is very research-based. And the 4 stages are this inclusion piece of safety, the learning safety aspect, students, staff, families need to be able to contribute even in their own language and through their own cultural norms, and also challenger safety, which is challenging the status quo. So as long as you create, I don't want to say a bubble, but an environment, an ecosystem that allows your policies to live within the realm of psychological safety as often as possible, you will begin to actualize those policies. So it's not a concern of the policies written right, they're written pretty well. We've done plenty of equity audits, and yours look pretty good for feedback. Is really the actualization that concerned us the most.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
You're welcome.
Member Cruz?
Thank you, Mayor, and appreciate hearing that the work is in the implementation. Is I think we do have a really good process for the policy reviews, and equity has been a focus. And Laura, I just have to thank you for naming the most important part. This is not your sole responsibility. It may be in your title. It's all of our work, and I think as a committee, we've talked about that strategically for quite some time, and that's why we don't have an equity subcommittee anymore, because we got to a place where that was time bound. It served its purpose, but I think we do have the right composition of a body that's focused on equity, and I think some of this is super important for us to understand where the gaps are, especially in the definition, just given where we're at with our equity statement, with our mission, and the work that we're trying to do every day for our students. So knowing that that's still a barrier, that raises a lot of questions for me. In particular, I want to talk about the increased transparency, and then also this piece on HR. So I guess I heard a couple of the things that you said about it, and I know we're going to get the actual document to dive in, but nothing like having the two living folks who helped put this together. So on the increased transparency piece, we have a budgetary process that we go through annually. Is it a lack of awareness of how folks can engage with that participatory process of the budget, from the findings that you saw? Is it there's not enough opportunities for folks to engage in the budget development process for their particular school or their function? Is it the shared decision-making component of it? I guess one of these things is about staff input, right, and being able to share new ideas. And you had mentioned following up on that. Is it people have said that I submitted a new idea for how we could use some of our funding in the district and nobody got back to me? I guess I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about where the transparency gap is in the process.
Cindy, do you want to start?
Sure, I will. Thank you for that question. We were discussing the transparency issue that came from the executive leadership team mainly. And then it's just that some folks had an idea of what it looked like, and some folks didn't exactly understand. And then who should get what. So it came down to messaging a lot. So I should start by saying first, everything that you said, but also the messaging needs to be clear, is that when we're doing our budget, this is going to take place through an equitable process. So if this department gets more money than that department, there's a reason for that. That transparency needs to be quite clear. So people aren't creating their own narratives as to why things are happening. And from looking at previous videos online, I do know that it is clear. So it's not, the superintendent is not making this message clear. There's a slight disconnect in interpretation, internalized interpretation of how that message is being sent. So our suggestion would be to sit with the, I'm assuming you already sit with the executive team before this budget comes out, because every other school system does, but really sit with the executive team and ask them pivotal questions, coach them through the budget rather than just get input, but coach them through. So what are some of the questions that linger? What are some of the areas that you feel we haven't touched? What are some of the concerns that you may have? Because I'd rather them come out in this room with us than come out in public. That's just a motto of mine. I carry that at home. I carry that in my business. What is going on with us that we need to discuss? Because before it goes out there, we need to be able to settle it in here. So that is our perspective on the transparency. Some folks feel that some areas get a little bit more than others, and that goes right back down to the term equity. If you understood equity rather than equality, you would understand why some departments may need a little more than others.
Thank you. That's super helpful insights. I can't wait to see what we have in writing on it, just so that we can dive in on which parts of our process we can be helpful in that coaching front and on the messaging. I know that my colleagues on the finance subcommittee spend a lot of time engaging with school leaders and the district leadership on developing the budget. But if there are things that we can do to assist them with how that message disseminates, and I think we've got a lot of good experience with communication in the district. So happy to be a thought partner there for you, Steve, and for the team too. The other piece was around the threats on the compliance and time constraints for HR. I think my number one concern with HR as just a function is that, and this is just broader HR, that it is generally speaking like antiquated systems. Here in Salem, we're trying to do, I think, different things so that it's not a transactional function, and I think we've made a lot of good progress there. But I guess at a high level, I'm just trying to understand like this HR like compliance requirement piece that you name as a threat, where you're saying that is that heavy workload hinders equity. Is that folks raising up that like we don't have sufficient staff to handle the compliance stuff, so we can't work on the pieces that make us less transactional, like employee engagement, employee support, counseling, coaching, etc. Like I'm just, I guess, trying to understand what that particular piece means.
I think the superintendent wants to
Yeah, so just on that, just before, on the the equity resource allocation, that's something Elizabeth is on right now. This issue, I think this is all right, what was been said, but we also need better information. So when people say, "Oh, that school gets more than others," we can actually show that that's true or not true. And that's one of the things that Elizabeth is definitely, especially in a year where we have very finite resources, that is important that we be able to either dispel the narrative or support the narrative that there's inequitable resource allocation. So that's and I know that that's something Elizabeth's working on right now for looking at our FTE and then per school and how much we spend per student. So stay tuned on that. In terms of the HR, I do think this is a major pain point for the system right now. HR is overloaded with a lot of transactional work, and that's been true, especially as we've done a lot of hiring over the last few years. Thankfully, it wasn't quite as much this year. But I do worry that we are not sufficiently staffed, and this is not a year to be asking for more staff right now, especially as it pertains to some of the pipeline work and the retention work. As you know, we wanted to hire a recruiter. We had someone temporarily, and then that money ran out with ESSER. So that is a big problem. The ownership of, while we've done a lot of work in terms of recruiting more staff of color, our retention efforts, and then our acceleration of some of the pipeline work for paras, for not even our instructional staff who's on waivers and that we need to get certified. The bandwidth is really problematic, and so I wish I had a better answer than that right now. It is a pain point that we're trying to figure out how to address it. It's being shared by Laura is doing a lot of the work with affinity groups and some of the retention work with staff, but then also HR wants to own it, but the day-to-day requirements has become pretty intense in that department. So I think that is something we need to wrestle with, and it's going to be a challenge because the resources for us aren't there to add more people to that department.
Right. So we've had to be really creative in a lot of that work.
Right.
So Jill and I meet on a biweekly basis to cover all of those aspects of recruitment, retention, and then any of the other areas of business that she and I handle when it comes to supporting educators on a day-to-day with anything that might be going on without going into too much detail. It's also important to note that HR is a 2.5 person department.
Right.
So there's, while we're thinking about the conversation on like, how many more people do we need? We think about like, who can support us in this work? Like, who's in it right now? Who are the educators that have gone through this process that can speak on that process so that we can, support with recruiting, and whether that is supporting through a stipend or that's why we had the talent finder fellow opportunity that came up, and how we're continuing to grow that. Those are kind of the unique ways that Jill and myself, through affinity groups, partnership with Salem State and other higher ed organizations, that we want to be able to support our educators and elevating the work that they're doing. So we're just being really creative with the limited staff resources that we have.
And I'll just say that you both gave me the kind of insights I was looking for on that question. So Steve, give yourself some credit. I think that's exactly what I was hoping to hear in terms of the specifics. And then I think, Laura, you just came in and really painted a good picture of like what you're up against with the constraints. So just appreciate you both sharing that, and gives certainly me and the rest of the body a lot to think about.
You're welcome.
And I just wanted to add that I fully agree with everything they said, and they couldn't have said it any better. And we did want to give credit to the HR department, because even with all the constraints, they're still looking at how they can diversify the staffing pool.
Member Manning?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. As far as the HR situation, I almost feel like we need to really go into like, and everybody's talked about it. We almost need like two people of sort of a not both the head. I mean, you have to have one head, but somebody whose skill set is the certifications and all of that stuff, and another person whose skill set is the supporting the new people, recruiting, doing all the person-to-person things that you're trying to do while you're doing your other real job. Not that that's not a part of real too, but you have so many reals, and we may only have 2.5 people, but I think we need to redefine what part of those 2.5 people may be, responsible for. Try to have people able to focus on one of those areas. I think that, for example, I don't think Jill can keep up with doing both, because she's walking on water, but you can only walk on water so long, and the people down there, I think they work very hard and know what they're doing. I think, though, we might need to look at what we're expecting them to do and change that a little bit. I'm not sure. You're right. I mean, it's a tight budget year, but it seems like maybe we can help to reorganize that a little bit. That's just one thought as you were talking. As far as getting back to either departments or buildings on why they didn't get something, or why some school did and somebody didn't, and all of that. And I mean, the basic premise under all of that is that fair isn't always equal. It's seldom equal, but the time constraint of the whole budget, and I hope this is going to be a little better this year, because we're saying we're going to start earlier. But when we do talk with people as the finance committee, we hear them. We make recommendations of what we think, and the central office does, but there's no part where we, for example, go back to explain to a principal or to someone why we did what we did as a finance committee. It goes back, I think, through central office, but the communication, we ask them to come in and talk with us, but then we never talk with them afterward. And I don't know how we would pull that off, because there's 19 of them, 19 groups or something. But somehow a piece there feels like it's missing. And I don't know if we could do a better job of helping with that, with just explaining to people why we made decisions we made, And I have one question. I mean, Beth Ann sort of asked what I was thinking about the whole policy thing, because when you said you reviewed the policy, I mean, I know the two of us, and I felt, man, it's like, what, But I'm glad to hear that at least what we're trying to do in writing is hopefully seems to be, heading in the right direction. I'm just wondering, since the recommendations, you have 6 or 7 of them, and one of them is actually clarification of absence policies. So that must be an issue big enough to make this list. And can you just give us a hint, of where you're going with this? It's just worrisome to see a policy on the list of things to focus right on. I don't know.
No, sure. So I can give my perspective, and I'll also turn it to Cindy to share from the equity process perspective, because these are recommendations that came out of what they found. For me, my takeaway and this being highlighted
Right.
is understanding that the way that we as a district, we're doing a really great job at trying to have better guidelines to share with students, families, on what our attendance policies are. And when it comes to students being tardy or being absent, like what's an excuse, what's unexcused, when I think about the families and how they understand it, some
get
of
it.
that work for me, in my takeaway of what the equity process recommended, is the work that needs to be clarified.
Okay, I understand.
So for me,
where you're going.
it's that action piece after.
Yep.
But I want to give Cindy an opportunity to answer from her perspective on that.
Thank you, Laura. So I totally agree with everything that you've shared. And what I would just say, to maybe put it in another voice, is what is compliant, or I mean, what does the state expect, the Department of Education expects, versus where's the flexibility within the school department, right? So the state is going to have their own recommendations and expectations for attendance policies. But outside of that, what can we do to support our families that, say, travel during the winter months? They may go back home if they're not from here. As I said, I'm an immigrant, so those are some of the things, and there are other immigrants within the organization. So those are some of the things that we tend to look for. Like, there's this compliance piece and there's a little wiggle room. What can we do with the wiggle room to make it better for our students and families?
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I appreciate that clarification. I would ask. I spent a long time trying to find the answers that you people have just talked about. So if you ever get those things clarified, give me a holler.
Yes.
I'd like to know.
Yep. Member Cornell.
On the piece on staff input, it seems that like until we get the diverse staff and representation that we're working toward, which is not easy given the constraints we have around HR and recruitment and everything that you've already noted, it seems that we need to be really hyper-focused on the voices and perspectives of our staff of color, particularly when it comes to, curriculum, school culture, student supports, policy implementation, because we don't have a role to play with implementation. We have to write it. And so I'm curious about to what extent right now we're able to really elevate the voices of our staff of color. I think particularly our Latino staff, given our student population, like that should carry a great deal of weight for us, given our student population. So how well are we able to do that right now? And if it's something that we can be better at, is this part of the equity audit?
So I'll speak to the work that I've done, that I did this past year. So the work that was done prior to this role being created, the one place where the voices of staff of color could be present would be through affinity groups. Prior to this role being created, affinity groups were offered once a month, and they were offered in schools. And whether you can imagine it or not, that could be a really uncomfortable space, because anyone can walk in and it doesn't feel like a safe space anymore. So then over time, it moved out into the community. And now it's grown to both in the community and also in school, in a safe space, in like designated safe space in school. So last year, again, outside of the monthly sessions, there were smaller sessions that I started to hold after school, And a lot of that feedback did go back to principals, or some principals for the most part. And it also came to our executive team of some of the concerns, trends by school, by sometimes it was down to a particular area of learning, whether it was math, ELA, or any of those, to specialists, to after-school programs, etc. I think my pain point when it comes to that is, and Steve and I had this conversation the other day, where there's no right time to hold an affinity group space. The majority of our educators of color are in the spaces of our bus monitors, drivers, our custodial, food service staff, paraprofessionals, and their schedules range widely. And our affinity groups are held after school, where that could be from 1:50 to 3:30. Right? And our kitchen staff, or food service and nutrition services staff, they're gone by 12 o'clock, right? So when would we hold could we hold an affinity group around that time? Also recognizing that most of them, just in conversations with them, have other jobs that they go through, because this is a part-time opportunity that they have with us. So taking away from income for their family doesn't feel right for me. So I don't want to touch that. So just really thinking outside of the box when it comes to how do we get that valuable feedback from the experiences of the educators in those roles. It's something that I'm focusing on this year, but that wasn't prior to that.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking about how do we give weight to those perspectives when we're talking about implementation of policy, or, like I said, curriculum, or whatever that happens to be, without overburdening or giving responsibility to, populations that are, constantly bearing the responsibility of having to educate, inform, and it's not. We need that perspective, and we need to elevate it, and then it's.
Right, and we have some really great allies that are educators that are educators that don't identify as educators of color. That where's that space for them to bring this information at as well? And that's not a space that's created right now. I've had individual conversations with educators. I'll bring them to my office. I'll meet with them in a separate space where they're like, I'm seeing my friend dealing with some things and I don't know what to do, right? And those are opportunities that we need to think about as well, because yes, there's a missing group of individuals and their voice, and we have some really great allies that also want to speak up. That right now we don't have a space for that to happen.
I'd also just point out, Laura and I do have a couple different opportunities to hear from a diverse group of educators that are, leaders of color, educators who are leaders within the district. Laura has an equity, you didn't mention this, but there's an equity, race and equity task force that we sort of replicated after the city that has a diverse group of teachers. My teacher advisory group does have multiple members of color, teachers of color in that group as well. And I think, we just got to continue. I think you're right, Beth Ann. We've got to elevate without overburdening folks, but giving them the opportunities to share and elevate concerns that they see within the system. It's also not been uncommon that these folks have reached out to Laura and I to sit down and have conversations, and we've heard some, difficult things to hear, both positive and things that could be improved. I mean, I think the note about some of the issues around evaluation and support for educators of color is real, and we're hearing a little bit of that in the affinity groups. But people are also making appointments to come talk to us about that. I mean, and we just got to continue to foster that. It's okay. We encourage it. We're not going to get offended. It's going to make us better as a system to hear, even if it's painful to hear. How do we improve the experience? So it's a journey, but I think people, they know Laura's here now, and that's I also think last thing I'd say about this is we have to do a better job of making sure people exactly know who she is, although she's pretty well known in the community, but like what exactly her role is. Like she's a safe person to talk to. She's not there to judge. She's not there to report back to me. But she has my ear and the executive team's ear because, again, it's not just her responsibility, it's our collective responsibility. So I do feel like as a system we're getting better, knowing that we're still doing a lot, not lousy, but we could be doing a much better job of retaining staff of color in the system. That's what worries me. I think we've done a good job of getting more people in, but like how are we supporting them to get their credential, to move up, get their certification, move up in their careers. We have a lot of middle managers who are staff of color. We do not have a lot of executive team members. We don't have enough principals, and I'm not happy about where we are 4 years into my tenure here. But we're building a bench. I would like it to go faster than it has. And that's another thing. I mean, if we don't have enough leaders of color in the district, I mean, that also, that's problematic in terms of creating, nurturing, the next, group of young, staff members, new staff members. We don't have enough people at the table. Both at the school level and at the district level. And so I would ask that you continue to push me on that as we make hiring decisions in the future.
Member Miranda?
Thanks so much for all of this. Laura, I did just want to ask, I have like several things here, but I'll try to shorten it. The first thing is, since I've been on the school committee, there hasn't been any type of like training around this stuff. And though I know that my colleagues here are maybe further along in the work than some others, like the work is never complete. So I definitely think that it would be, amazing. I don't know if you could facilitate that or
Training for you, I'm sorry, you guys or
school
for?
committee members.
Okay.
I mean, you could come.
No. I didn't know if you meant for like staff. Or
You bring bagels.
Yeah, if there's good food, you sure.
So that's one. And then the other question I wanted to ask was centered around like restorative justice. So like, what does that look like when a student, a family member, or an educator like unintentionally causes harm?
Thank you for that. I really appreciate the suggestion on training for this body, and I think that there's definitely an opportunity, not just for this body, but our executive team, principals, et cetera, that can have some tailored training, and we can think about what exactly that would look like, or if it's just something in general. Our restorative justice training consists of, so we have a lot of educators. I don't know the number, and I wonder, Ellen, if you have that, but I know that there's a lot of our educators, and particularly our building leaders, coaches, are trained in Tier 1 and Tier 2 restorative justice training. So when we have an incident of whether it's an educator or a student that may be causing harm, there's either a circle within the classroom or wherever the harm is being caused, and depending on the situation or the harm that was caused, the student or educator who caused it has an individual session with whoever was affected by it. So there are practices that are put in place through the restorative justice training that we've had over the last several years that does come into play when it comes to that. So that's been a first step for a lot of our buildings right now before it comes to like myself, Jill, or Ellen for the most part. So we try to take those preventative measures first before going into like a formal investigation or anything like that, as we do recognize that can cause further anxiety for everyone involved. And if we can continue to create opportunities for belonging and communities of care, then that's the approach that we're going to take. So there's a lot of that work that's happening right now.
Thank you.
Member Cruz, then Member Manning.
I think to the question that Member Cornell had raised around like the functions of our work as a body, where we might get educator inputs, and then to Member Miranda's point around the trainings, I think the good news that I can offer you is that before the 31st, I'm really hopeful that a new state law will be in place that will require every committee to have what's called an Educator Diversity Council, which will function in the same way. It's something I've been working with Dr. Reich and Member Campbell on for 4 years now, but every committee would be required to have this type of function. And I think this would be really a powerful space at the highest level of governance within the district, because we have all these different functions between instructional leadership teams, the affinity work group, the task force, et cetera. But if it doesn't reach the governance and what we're doing with policy, with curriculum, budgets, et cetera, and we're not engaging educators of color and allies and co-conspirators, we're creating things that are missing their perspective. So I'm hoping that as a committee, like if that law should pass, or if it doesn't, that we think about the way that we can formalize that engagement. I think we had really great conversations with our friends in the STU, as an example, about a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion topics during the last rounds of contract negotiations. I would hate for the only time that we get to hear from educators about those pieces to be when we're negotiating a contract. I would love it to be a more proactive, governance-based conversation with our educators, because I know we all clamor for that, and we don't get enough of it at these meetings. And then to the piece about the training would also be mandated annually for school committee members to take, and all staff across the district. And in that spirit, like, I don't want to leave this to state law. I think we should do this on our own. But I would love to not only have our own time to get training as a committee, but I also think it would be to our benefit to put that PD into like a scope and sequence with the ELT, so that, again, as we're thinking about like our role as a committee, their role as the folks that do implementation, we're also building some trust, because we have some rocky waters that we need to navigate together in the future. So, I do think, based on the findings of this audit, there's a lot to dive into here. So as we think about like diversity, equity, and inclusion training, certainly needs to happen at the committee, but I do think we need to find a way to bring both groups together to do some learning.
Member Manning.
I just want to go back to the ally thing for a minute, because I had my hand sort of raised when you, and I was going to talk about that because it just dawned on me as you were speaking that the whole situation of, people speaking up for their friends and whatever was sort of the ally thing. And then you started talking about it, and it just, if we can go back to it for a minute, there's certainly differences, but there are some similarities. If you go back several years in the school system, and you look at the LGBTQ staff, and the sort of the growing awareness that they existed, kids and staff, and parents and everybody, school committee member, yeah, and then as the process of like sort of transforming the schools and to more accepting places, and eventually, classrooms where teachers had agreed to be safe zones, and et cetera, et cetera. And the allies started to become more formalized, like to be a real thing, not just like a good friend that would support somebody, but somebody who would speak up for anybody who was in a bad situation or whatever. And I think if you, when you have time, if you could just think a little bit more of that concept of the allies, because I saw it work. It took, it takes a long time, but I did see it work and spread. And if there's a way that you can think of, with differences obviously, but if there's a way for you to try to use that concept more, that that we can help you with by providing some support. All right, I'd like to circle back to that eventually. Depending on what you think we could do, because if that can take a hold, it does work.
No, and I remember when I first started in the district, there was a group that I was a part of that was a support for educators and families of students or families themselves that identified as LGBTQ. And that's no longer something that,
Yeah.
you know, we
And
had
the
an
Gay
educator
Straight
that was running
Alliances
it.
and all that, you know.
Yeah, we had an
And-
educator, then that educator's no longer with us, right?
Yeah.
So like who continued
Yeah.
that work on? And again, as I mentioned in the beginning, like I can't be the only person doing all
You
of
can't
that
do it
work.
all, no, no.
And who could step up to support in that?
Yeah.
Are they someone, and also like who are the partners that can be
Yep.
the ones to you know, I don't claim to be an expert in all the things. I know some things, but not everything.
Yeah, and
right?
I'm not asking you to, I'm just,
No, and I hear that. I
I'm
hear
just
that.
asking you to take a look at how
Yeah.
that could be used in the situations we're talking about.
Right. So I know, like in the city, I work really closely with city's DEI director, Regina Zaragoza Frey, and she has employee resource groups where some of them are identified for like who's a parent who works in the city. So it doesn't have to just be like on race or ethnicity or some of those identifiers. It could be like any other topic, and it's an opportunity that was created based on what people needed, and not so much on like some of the things that we suggest. So I am thinking about like how can that be something that we have here. The question is on when do we do it, who's going to run it, and how often these things are going to happen,
And what
who's
is
going.
it?
What is it,
Yep.
and like, you know, am I going to be the person that kind of ensures that there are supportive communities being built in each and every one of them? I don't know. Yeah.
Yep, Member Miranda.
Sorry, I know it's getting late. One thing that I did just feel was like important for me to add is as one of two elected officials of color in the city, I do feel, and I don't know where this responsibility falls, but I do feel that there needs to be more support for electeds of color, and maybe specifically from, you know, the white city electeds, because it's one thing to say that we care about representation and like that's our value, and it's something else to stand there and support the person, and be there and be able to provide like resources, or just like an ear, because it's very different being like an elected of color, I think. So just wanted to kind of name that, so maybe that could be tied into like the trainings or whatever, but I think we need to do a better job of supporting and encouraging electeds of color, people of color, to run for things.
Agreed. Thank you.
So no further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Good job, Laura.
Thank you.
Who's taking?
Just quickly, the next item, thank you, Laura, is the school improvement plan. So there, later on, there's just a vote to accept.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I just want to say thank you to Cindy, and that she
right.
can also, if you'd like to stay, you're welcome, or not. But I'll follow up.
Cindy, I hope you heard, we did applaud you and Laura's work, so.
Is Cindy still there?
Thank you very much. I am going to leave. I want to say thank you very much. There's a few things I wanted to highlight just through my profession. So I am a professionally certified mindfulness teacher. I am certified through Stanford University as an applied training person in compassion. I have a master's from Simmons, a bachelor's from UMass Boston, and I am a certified state mediator. And I want to say, of all the school committee meetings I've been to, you have had the most mindful school committee meeting I've ever attended. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions. And I hope that just your whole ability to stay within the work continues, because you've moved me tonight. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Cindy. Thank you all.
That's tough to follow. But I'd like to have a degree in compassion too.
Not gonna happen.
Yes, just on school improvement plans, I am asking for a vote from the committee to accept the plans for 2025 that were laid on the table at the last school committee meeting. But I don't know if you want to take that after, or you want to do that
Yeah,
now?
well, we'll do that after your report, but
Okay.
if there's any questions that folks want to make now about the plans.
Okay. And then the other items are not necessarily mine, but the MSBA update. I don't know, Beth Ann, if there's anything you want to.
Yep, I just
Sure.
want people to know that we have scheduled 3 meetings that will introduce the building project goals, the schedule, and the team to the larger community. So there will be invitations going out. But they'll be Monday, the 25th at Salem High School, Tuesday, December 3rd at Saltonstall, and Thursday, the 5th on Zoom. And it's really just to kind of kick off the process, meet the consulting team, introduce the schedule. Everybody can ask questions. And there will be more opportunity for public input after in the new year. So, and I also want to note that the school committee will be having a retreat on November 23rd to talk about grade configuration, whether we're thinking about a middle high school or just a high school for the building.
Yeah, just to add on that, I will also be engaging the staff as part of that as well. We haven't set those dates yet. And yeah, you mentioned the retreat. Yeah, so a lot happening. I will make sure the school committee has all those dates that are upcoming for the public engagement. Lisa, is there anything else? That was it. That was it, okay.
It's the same presentation at all 3 meetings, so people can any one of the 3.
Little question.
Oh, yep, Member Manning.
Steve, did you mean you're engaging the staff in that November 23rd meeting, or like
No,
engaging the staff?
I'm going to have separate meetings for the
Okay.
faculty to,
Okay.
probably over Zoom, to have some of the same information,
Yep.
but to have a specific meeting just for faculty, not, they can go to the community meetings as well. I will also, I do know that there was a request, I think we should send out to the school committee the data that we collected at some of the community meetings in the spring. So I'll make sure you have all that. Lisa compiled and synthesized a lot of the input we received from parents that is going to be useful for the committee to take a look at. So I'll send that along to you in the next week or so.
Thank you.
And then finance and operations.
I have no report.
Lovely.
Okay. And then Saltonstall Middle School grades, we obviously discussed that earlier. I just put it on again if there was anybody that wanted to say anything at this meeting. So that concludes it.
All right. Item 7 is subcommittee reports. I don't know if there's any subcommittee reports. Buildings, Paul? Nope. Okay. Under motions and resolutions, we have one item, which is the school improvement plans for 2025 that were presented at the last meeting. Members have had some time to review. Any questions?
Move to approve the school improvement plans for 2025 as submitted by the superintendent.
I'll second.
Under discussion? I'll just say thank you to everybody who was involved in putting those together. There's very thorough and very thoughtful. So, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, the matter carries. Announcements. Oh, Member Cruz.
I'd just like to remind the public that tomorrow is Election Day. School buildings will be closed. Now, the polls will
Except
be...
for Carlton.
Except for Carlton. And the buildings will be open for voting, and please make a plan to vote, and thank you.
Polls open in less than 10 hours.
That's right.
Any further announcements? If not, item 10.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Discussion, seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? The matter carries. We are adjourned. Thank you.